Hello, landlords. Joy here. Whenever you hear a landlord say, "Yes, my tenant is taking care of the lawn care," a familiar retort usually follows. Sure, and how's that working for you? This is because most landlords cringe at the thought of entrusting tenants with this responsibility. And for good reason. A few tenants will want to do the lawn care, and they actually will. Many tenants will tell you they will handle lawn care but never will. But the majority of tenants want nothing to do with tending to your lawn, and if they can get out of it, they will. So let's break this down. Does it make sense to ask your tenant to pay rent and handle the lawn? Is it fair? Let's talk about it. Some investors or landlords will tell you to avoid properties altogether with lawns or green space because it can be expensive to maintain. This is not necessarily bad advice. Some tenants are not outdoor people, and your amazing, lush, green private space has zero allure for them. But on the flip side, 72% of renters have pets, and these renters will actually want a private backyard, if even only for their beloved Fluffy. But some renters will cringe when they hear that they are responsible for yard maintenance. They may think, "Why should I upkeep the lawn? It's the landlord's property." Well, yes, this is true, but in my research, I have found a defining way to think about this. If the property is a townhouse or condo and there is shared green space, then absolutely the landlord is 100% responsible for upkeep, hands down. But if the house has a private backyard, of which only the tenant will enjoy, it is generally thought that the tenant will then be responsible for the space. If the tenant will solely be enjoying the yard, they will need to maintain the yard. Each can have their own thoughts on this, but this is the general rule. Then the question becomes, will the tenant obey? Here is my lawn care strategy. The first logical option might be that the landlord simply includes lawn care as part of rent. If your property budget allows for this cost, this is a great idea. It also will likely be a selling point for the renter when you post your ad. The landlord can pay for a service and everyone is happy. The tenant is thrilled because they don't have to do anything, and the landlord is happy because they know the lawn is being cared for on a regular basis without relying on the tenant. If the landlord is not going to procure lawn service, then it will need to be negotiated and a provision entered into the lease agreement. Under no circumstance should the landlord operate under oral agreements. This is a terrible, terrible idea. If your lease does not spell out the specifics of what is required of the tenant, I guarantee you they will not do it and there will be no recourse. And let's be honest, when given a choice, most people do not want to do lawn care, so they won't. When negotiating yard maintenance, I like to offer 3 options. Option 1 is that the tenant, at the tenant's expense, will handle lawn care. This is exactly what it implies. The landlord will trust the tenant to have full control over the chore of yard work, although you, the landlord, will be checking on this regularly, of course. Option 2 is that the tenant, at tenant's expense, will hire a service. Again, we go back to if the tenant is enjoying a private green space, they need to be responsible for it. And if that includes hiring a service, then that is on the tenant. Option 3 is landlord at tenant's expense will care for the lawn. At first, this may sound less than appealing because now the landlord has to do all the work, but there are a few strategies with this. The first is that the landlord now has reason to visit the property and investigate on a regular basis, even if it's just outside. Personally, by doing this, I have spotted several unauthorized pets and people that I never would have spotted had I not been there. The second is that you are not doing this for free. Remember, you're working at the tenant's expense, so at least you're being paid for your time. I charge $100 per month for the months that lawn care needs to be done, which includes raking in the fall. The third strategy is that if you really don't want to do lawn care, you can hire a service and the tenant can pay for it. This way, you're sure that your yard is being cared for without you having to do it or pay for it. I came up with the $100 amount because when I researched what lawn care companies charge in my area, I discovered that they charge about $45 to $50 per lawn mow, and they insist on mowing your grass every week. So that can be around $200 a month, which is a lot of money. Also, companies require a contract and require that you pay them every month, even in January and February, where no yard work is needed. So when you offer $100 per month for only the months the lawn care is done, suddenly this seems like a bargain for your tenant. If the tenant agrees to take on lawn duty, this is fine, but this needs careful attention. I cannot tell you how many times a renter has enthusiastically assured me they wanted to handle the yard work, only to find out in reality they had no intention of doing so, nor were they even going to bother to hire a service. To avoid this rookie mistake, make sure you outline lawn care in crazy detail in your lease. Literally spell out the number of days the sprinkler system should be activated and for how long the water cycle should last. This may sound ridiculous, but if left up to their own devices, tenants have no problem disobeying your rules. In my lease, I state, unless prohibited by ordinances or other laws, tenant will water the yard at reasonable and appropriate times, including but not limited to the following times: twice per week during the spring and summer months of April 1st through October 31st for a duration of 8 minutes per water cycle. After a disaster I experienced with a renter who actually just unplugged my sprinkler system, I now use an IoT sprinkler controller and I can control it with my phone. So if my tenant decides to unplug it or change the water cycle, I will know immediately. Remember, lawn care is actually important. It affects your curb appeal, and curb appeal equals more tenants and higher rent. So if your tenant is responsible for lawn care but disobeying your detailed written rules, you can issue a default if necessary. Let them know you're paying attention and you intend to uphold the lease agreement. Someone has to look after your lawn after all. Hope this was helpful, fellow landlords.